Hi, everyone. This is James Healy. I'm coming to you from Bozeman, Montana, and I'm an aspiring author, and sometimes I help people publish their books as well in my business, and I help produce podcasts. And I'm here today talking with Dennis Gaub, who's a fellow Toastmaster. We met in our Toastmasters club, and I have been with him along his path of authoring this book, which we're going to talk about today. Dennis is um, an author, of course, but he's also a very experienced and award-winning journalist. He has written for many years in a variety of formats, and I'm excited to have him here today to talk about his book, Midway, Bravery, the story of a U.S. Army pilot whose famed flight helped win a decisive World War II battle. And we can get into the book right away. But welcome, Dennis. Good to see you, man.
Thank you, James. Even though we're a distance apart.
Yeah, we're only a few miles apart now.
It feels like the same place.
I know. Well, we're all getting used to this virtual world. But it's good to see you, and have really enjoyed reading your book and also being with you along your pathway of writing the book. And like I was saying before we hit the record button, I was super impressed with all the research you did, personally interested in this story and this time in history. I think a lot of us, they're my age, we had grandfathers who all fought in World War II. My father's dad fought valiantly on Iwo Jima, got 2 Purple Hearts, right? He was injured, went onto the hospital ship, went back into the battle, injured again, earned a Silver Star, and ended up perishing. My grandmother got remarried to another Marine who adopted my father. And then my other grandfather was a tail gun trainer. I don't know if I even ever told you this, on B-24s. So
that's news.
So I reading all of this was super fascinating. Why don't you first tell us about the why of your book? Like, what inspired you to do all the research you did and come up with this amazing tale?
Thanks, James. I'm humbled by the kind words that you've given and lots of other people, as you say, on this journey. The why is very personal, and it involves my late wife, Carolyn, who died last September of aggressive brain cancer, incurable brain cancer, glioblastoma. About more than 6 years before her death, in February of 2013, when I still lived in Belgrade, Montana, right next to Bozeman, for those who aren't familiar with it, I was working as a proposal manager for a very large software company, Oracle. The job was fine. It was paying the bills and giving us benefits, but I felt that I was settling into the doldrums of corporate existence until a fateful morning. I was starting my day and listening to NPR streaming Yellowstone Public Radio based here in Billings on my phone, my computer, whatever, and listening to Morning Edition. The host, Robert Siegel, started a story where he talked about the then recent death, a couple days before that, of a World War II hero from the Battle of Midway. And he described this man's amazing flight and his plucky maneuver to escape Japanese fire on June 4th, 1942, 78 years, give or take, ago as we speak. He described that, and he mentioned the name. The name was Jim Meary. And something clicked. I walked out of the office to the front room of our house, typical Montana day. I want to think there was soft snow falling down in our yard. I'm not sure now, but let's say
Probably.
it was. It probably was. Chances are Montana in early February. And my wife, Carolyn, was sitting in her favorite chair looking out the window. She was a mostly retired school librarian at that point. I said to her, Carolyn, I just heard on NPR about a World War II hero of the Battle of Midway named James Healy. And I should add that Carolyn met me and we dated and got married after my 25-year plus string as a newspaper reporter and editor had ended. So she didn't know me during what I call my prime writing days. I said, Carolyn, I went to high school in Miles City, which she knew, before I graduated from high school here in Billings, and I knew a girl named Kathy Healy. I wonder if they're related. And it didn't take her more than about 15 seconds of pondering before she said what I call 3 magic words. There's your book. She literally saved my creative writing life, and that started this journey.
That's awesome. Yeah, like so inspirational to hear that story on NPR, right? And then to have that connection. Like, it's amazing. Now, Miri and his Army Air Force buddies, they were kind of, as we all were, surprised by this Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. How were they affected by this? Like, what just changed in what was going on? And maybe you can start to get into this story of this amazing tale, like you heard on NPR, and ultimately was depicted in the movie and Midway, and other people might be familiar with that.
Sure. Well, by Jim's accounting, and I should add, unfortunately I never met him before he died, but there's extensive newspaper articles in the Billings Gazette after he and his wife, his late wife, he was a widower for about the last 12 or so years of his life. He moved to Billings from elsewhere in Montana so his wife could have superior medical care. And the Billings Gazette covered him extensively. Unfortunately, I wasn't paying a close enough attention to my own former newspaper, and I missed those articles. Between that and finding those in digital archives, and I'll credit my sources, and an extensive interview he did in 1990 while he was living along the Yellowstone River in the shadow of the Crazy Mountains and the Beartooths with a representative of a society that is dedicated to preserving the legacy of the B-26 and its pilots. That's my source. There, he mentioned that in the fall of 1941, just to set the stage, the U.S. wasn't at war, but there was the Lend-Lease program that was in effect. We were sending supplies to an embattled Great Britain. France had already fallen. The Nazi army, I can never pronounce the name right, was on the march there. And meanwhile, in the Pacific, Japan also was taking over huge swaths of territory. China, Indochina. It looked like it could be down to, if Great Britain fell, it could be the U.S. against the combined fascist forces of Japan and Nazi Germany. So conditions, as Jim said, were deteriorating. In the fall of 1941, he and the 22nd Bomb Group and other Army Air Force groups were doing a lot of training along the East Coast. Langley Airfield near D.C., Savannah, Georgia, other places come to mind. I can't remember whether they hit Florida or not, but as luck would have it, he was on December 7th, he was back at Langley. The attack on Pearl Harbor occurred. Crews worked all night. getting planes ready, getting armament, putting machine guns on them, remember, this was also the Army too. It was the Army Air Force was part of it. So they had to get tanks ready, long-range tanks. They were going to ship the tanks by train to California. By the morning of December 8th, they were ready to go. We then, and I hope now, were action people. When there was a crisis, they said, let's go. And these guys were all young, in their teens, early 20s. They probably had tons of energy. Many of them had grown up on farms. They were not, contrary to what the Japanese thought of Americans, they were not soft. When their country called, they were ready to go.
Yeah.
So while they didn't know exactly what was happened, when probably almost by the time that President Franklin Roosevelt was giving his speech talking about a day of infamy, and that we needed to respond, they were on their way. They were on their way to Southern California, to what is now Edwards Air Force Base, for the next phase of their preparations to go to battle.
Yeah, I mean, mobilizing as quickly as possible. And they also had to, when they got to Hawaii, you were talking about how they had to change some of the configuration of these B-26s, right? They decided to add torpedoes onto the planes.
Yeah,
and that plays into a big piece of the story, correctly?
Right. I'll try not to belabor the point, but and even before that, they got up to San Francisco. They went by train from LA to San Francisco in February of 1942. This didn't happen immediately. And they had to dismantle, they had to take apart their B-26s. They were put on a ship that was part of a Navy convoy that sailed to Hawaii. Some later B-26s did fly directly from the U.S. to Hawaii. I'm not sure of the distance, but back then that was one heck of a long flight, especially with primitive navigational aids.
It's about 3,000 miles.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, 2,000 miles or whatever. If you've flown from California to Hawaii, you know about the distance. Back then, it was not a walk in the park. And so when they got to Hawaii, they had to put their planes back together. And the B-26s were unique in that they were designed, they were purpose-built, as they say, so they could either carry conventional land bombs or they could put special racks on them to carry torpedoes. And when they had, and the planning and plotting behind the scenes, Admiral Chester Nimitz, who was, of course, the supreme naval commander in the Pacific, kind of contending with MacArthur, I guess in mostly friendly but spirited competition to be the top dog in the Pacific. Nimitz, as time went on, knew he needed more torpedo planes. The Navy just didn't have enough. He wanted some extra bulk or some extra punch at Midway, which became known as the unsinkable carrier in the Pacific. Yeah. Of course, our carriers, by a pure stroke of good fortune, I don't know whether I'll call it luck, had escaped destruction at Pearl Harbor. And that was the ultimate prize that the Japanese were after. The day of big battleships duking it out on the ocean were over. People knew that even then. So Nimitz wanted some more torpedo power. So the B-26s were equipped with torpedoes. They were given hurried torpedo training by Navy pilots and basically said, good luck, you're a torpedo, you're a torpedo plane pilot now. You didn't know that when you signed up for the Army, but your orders just changed. And behind the scenes, well, and maybe I'm jumping the gun.
Yeah, I was going to say that you definitely got into the B-26 had a reputation, I think you said, as a widowmaker, right? It was
right.
Well, on a bunch of different, based on a bunch of different things, but they were challenging to fly, and these kids were kids, right? They were thrown into these planes and like said, here, Here are the keys. Good luck.
Yeah, give them the keys. They were plucky. Perhaps it was because as they were growing up, maybe a few of them got to tinker around with Model Ts, and Model As were just coming out in their boyhood, and they were. And in the case of Jim, growing up on a farm, you fixed your own stuff. You made it work. You learned how to do it. You didn't have some big thick instruction manual. You just learn by trial and error. Unfortunately, on the ground, usually the worst thing that happens is that some of those early tractors didn't work quite the way you wanted. Up in the air, the consequences of making a mistake were a lot more serious.
Yeah, definitely. Now, we see some of these planes coming through on air shows or tours. I know I've been to see some here, even in Bozeman. Are any of these B-26s left? Is there anything of Jim Meary's actual plane, the Susie Q, left?
That's a painful subject, James. I'm glad you asked it. No. And I'll add as a side note, I know what you're talking about. It's now called the Collings Foundation. They go across the country. I think they're based in Massachusetts. For a while, it was called the Confederate Air Force. I don't know when it changed. And I had the good fortune in my reporting days to actually fly in a B-24 from Big Timber, Montana to Billings, Montana. It's part of the same tour where they bring a B-17, a B-24. They bring a B-25, which is the famed twin-engine bomber that Jimmy Doolittle and 15 other plucky pilots, plus their crews, used to take off from the Hornet for the April 1942 raid on Tokyo. But the B-26s, for various reasons, do not exist in flyable form anymore. There are some static displays. Show you this mug. This is from the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. Tremendous place. I can't recommend it highly enough. My wife and I were there in May 2017. This is the only. I didn't get a T-shirt as a souvenir. I got a mug as a souvenir, and there's a static display. I've seen a B-26 restored up close, along with a Japanese Zero that tangled with the B-26s off Midway. One of the most famous, if you get a chance, and I haven't done it myself, one of the most famous ones from combat in Europe is called Flak Bait. The Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. is restoring that. I'm not sure the status of that project. Sadly, there were only a handful of halfway flyable ones that survived. And by the mid-1990s, I think it was pretty much down to one. A man in Florida had it. He owned it privately. I've heard that people were taken up on flights, but because of the huge expense for upkeep, and I think this man is getting quite elderly himself, to my knowledge, no B-26s are flyable now. Somebody tells you, it's kind of like finding a unicorn. Now, there are places, a quick side note, kind of a companion plane was called the A-26. The B-26 was made by the Glenn Martin Company, Martin Lockheed now. The A-26 was made by Douglas. It used a crew of 2 or 3. And some of those were used even into the Vietnam War era. Different planes, similar in some ways, fast and maneuverable, didn't have the clipped wings. They were used for firefighting for slurry bombers in Montana as recently as maybe in the last 10 or 15 years. And you can find flyable A-26s around. I believe the Collings Foundation is trying to bring along an A-26 with its display when I last talked to those people. B-26s, nope. If somebody's got $1 million or $2 million, maybe they could put together a project to
pieces and parts
restore a flyable B-26. And I'd blow my son's inheritance and a lot more to go up in the air in one of those.
Right. Now we mentioned earlier a little bit that it had a reputation as a widowmaker, and I know one of my grandfather's favorite stories to tell from his time he was based in Florida as a tail gunner trainer. was the day that, for some reason, I think he blamed my mom when she was a little toddler at the time. He was late for work and he missed a training flight that disappeared over the Bermuda Triangle. So there were often crashes, right? Like was Jim ever involved in a crash or anything as dramatic as that? Or what did he think of the plane and flying these scenes?
To my knowledge, he never was involved in, he never, I found no reference of him actually surviving a crash.
Okay.
He loved that plane. It was a high performance machine. For the time, it could cruise at 330 miles an hour, wow, which was very, very fast. It could, I don't know if I can say safely, could outrun the Japanese Zero fighters, but it was, it could put its tail between its legs and really move. Now, the problem in Jim's view, and I should add that Jimmy Doolittle loved the B-26 also. It was his personal plane. So there's some pretty good credentials for it. Yeah. And Miri, there was this saying, one a day at Tampa Bay, because MacDill Airfield was one of the primary training grounds. Jim later was at Eglin Airfield in the Panhandle near Pensacola. But he felt that that pilot and crew error rather than the plane defects were causing most, if not all, of those crashes. Essentially, what would happen is if you can fly a plane, I'm not an air aviation expert, but with a twin engine plane, evidently, if you know what you're doing, you can fly the plane for a little while on one engine and get it to the ground. You're not going to go off on some big mission if you know what you're doing. And the instinct of many pilots, if they lost an engine back then, was to gun the remaining engine. And that would just make the plane turn over on its side. Instead, what you needed to do was let off on the gas and then gently power it up again so you could maintain your altitude. And then you could safely bring the plane to the ground, and maybe they'd find you another engine and you would live to fly another day. Ultimately, the training crew, the trainers at Tampa, I don't think I can say that Jim single-handedly changed that thinking, but he was part of a group of people who learned how to fly the B-26 safely and effectively, and their way of thinking took over at Tampa, which was the main training ground for the B-26s.
Yeah, to me, it sounds like so much of it was they were flying these by instinct and by gut and by feel, and through the experience, maybe of driving, those souped up roadsters or cars or tractors or whatever, right? Like you just had to get a feel for how the power worked and everything. So you mentioned that these planes were kind of sports cars. They're fast, right? And that in the book, in the story, of course, how you described Jim ducking and dodging and piloting his plane, trying to avoid these zeros in that famous battle scene. How did he do that, and how did he avoid crashing? Because they were small and fast too, right? Like, I mean, I can't imagine being in that moment.
Well, and I'm if you don't mind, I'm checking some of my notes because he had a description that was better than I could memorize. But he knew he couldn't outrun the bullets from those planes, from those Japanese girls, and he could hear the bullets pinging. They had 3/8-inch steel plates at the back of the plane, and I think they also had some. Later on, it was after that battle, they said they literally needed better protection inside the plane, behind the pilot's seat, so they didn't literally get shot in the back. But anyway, hearing those bullets disturbed him a bit. Can we call that an understatement? So climbing, diving, turning, that didn't shake off the zeros. I'm thinking he rolled the wheel as far to the right as he could, pushed full left rudder. Imagine This is called a clipped wing, a short wing B-26. If you've ever seen, I think the one in Dayton gives you a picture of it, and you can probably go online and see pictures of clipped wings, short wing. Far to the right as he could, pull left rudder. Imagine that plane going 300 miles an hour when all of that happened. Well, what happened was the plane zoomed 10 miles away just in a flash. You escaped the zeros. That helped save his life and the life of the 6 other people on the plane. A B-26 had a pilot, a co-pilot, and 5 crew members. And that life-saving maneuver, then, I don't know if it became part of the vernacular. Jim didn't necessarily invent the technique, but it worked. And so that's the derivation of ducking and dodging that I used in the book.
All right. Now, can you briefly describe, like, there's this famous scene. Do you want to tell us a little bit about it? Like what Jim did in this moment, and we don't want to give it all away, but I think it's like pivotal in this story, right?
You mean the key moment?
The key moment, yes.
when everything is on the line, and and I must give credit to a man named Rob Perry. He's a freelance graphic artist out in Seattle who designed the cover of my book. There were no photographs. There were other photographs. You can find photographs that the Navy got during the battle, but there were no photographers on that plane. Yeah. So it had to be based on a description that Jim gave. He penciled out a description as he was coming into the Akaji. And Perry and others have captured this moment in drawings for aviation magazines and so on. Quite some very dramatic paintings. He's to briefly understand this, a plane carrying a torpedo, it probably stands to reason. You aren't way up in the air dropping a torpedo. You have to almost get level. You have to get a very small angle of approach for that torpedo as it's going towards the target, because it's going through the water. It has a motor in it, and it has a navigation system. And also I should point out real quickly, our torpedoes were absolutely turkeys in the early part of the war. They would spin around in circles. You know, the Japanese would see one coming, and it would do a dipsy doodle in the water, go off in the opposite direction. Or if it came close, it might just go bang, metal against the hull of a ship, didn't explode or anything. Those Americans just don't know torpedoes. So he's carrying one of those torpedoes. He and the other 4 planes in that little B-26 formation that were part of a 10-plane formation, 6 Navy torpedo planes. And it appeared to the Japanese it was a coordinated attack at the very start of the hostilities, very beginning of that. They're coming on. And the reason they came in together, because the Navy Avengers were couldn't go as fast. So the Marauders, the B-26 Marauders, caught up with them, and they came in almost simultaneously. But it was pretty much every man for himself in the B-26s, down to 2 B-26s were shot down almost immediately. All of their crew members lost at sea. Jim Collins, the squadron commander, and his plane, and Jim Meary and his plane survived. They come in on either side. They're trying to come in on the side of the Akaji. Well, the Akaji is maneuvering. The Akaji, I should add, is the biggest aircraft in the world at the time. It's the flagship of the fleet. Admiral Nagumo, who led the attack on Pearl Harbor, he reported to Yamamoto. But he's on the ship. This is his flagship. And they're so low in the water. Jim is so low in the water. He's lost track of Collins. Jim Meary has lost track of Jim Collins. Lots of Jims to keep track of. Plus you, James.
Another Jim.
Yeah. And he's flying so low. This big old ship with its deck I don't know how, way high in the water. And his co-pilot, Pren Moore, is yelling at him, bank up, push it up, Jim. Basically, we're going to collide. We're going to run right into the ship. So at the last minute, he pulls up, he banks, I don't know what degree, but it had to be pretty sharp. And he buzzes the deck of the Akagi. He's wrong way Miri. He's going the wrong way than if he had landed, because he doesn't have any choice. And fortunately, the anti-aircraft guns are pointing out. He has an escape path by buzzing the deck of that carrier, maybe 50 feet above the surface.
Wow.
He later said he was flying so low that if he had put his wheels down, he could have landed on that deck. And the Japanese are stunned. They have no. What is this crazy American doing? By then they can see the painting, the insignia and stuff. They know this is an American plane coming at them.
Yeah,
they managed to cut some communication wires. They fired off a few rounds. They might have killed a couple of Japanese guys, but mainly, in a quirky way. You can read about it in the book. They didn't sink any ships, but the B-26, Susie Q, his plane, and Collins' plane, and there were waves of torpedo planes, other Navy torpedo planes, before the pivotal moment, set up the kill shots, if you will, the things that took out the carriers and sealed the defeat.
Right.
Many knowledgeable military scholars think that if those torpedo planes, including that gutsy flight by a Montanan named Jim Miri, hadn't happened, the battle might have come out differently. It set up the incredible feats by the Navy dive bombers, led by Dick Best and Wade McCluskey.
Yeah.
No begrudging them their incredible courage and everything they did, but it was teamwork without even being intended that way. It was just pluck and guts. It still puts chills down my spine when I think about that story.
Yeah, mine too. It's amazing. I mean, and you do a fantastic job of the research you put into this book and pulling these stories and talking. Obviously, this comes from your years of journalism, how to find the right people and interview them and pull these stories out of them and then put them into this tale that is true, that you couldn't write as fiction. And to me, when I'm reading it, that's what comes out to me. It's like, oh my gosh. And that's where the chills come from, right? It's like, you couldn't make this stuff up, but it's true. So yeah. Congratulations. This book is fantastic.
Thank you.
How can people contact you and find out more if they have questions and learn more about the book, or how to get you? Because I saw you also give a great author's presentation at the bookstore here in Bozeman, and it gives folks an opportunity to ask questions, and you read from the book and give us a lot more insight and detail into it.
People there's several ways they can get the book and contact me. And maybe we can, I don't know if you have the skills to put this as on the screen or not.
Oh, yeah.
But I'll repeat it a couple of times. One way of reaching me and ordering copies of the book is to go to the website that is devoted to the book. It's simply enough, midwaybravery.com. Again, that's midwaybravery.com. Thanks to a techie friend. I have some tech facility, but a techie friend helped me set it up with secure e-commerce capabilities. You can literally order a signed copy and then it goes out in the mail to you. You pay for it, it comes to you. You can also go to Amazon and find it there, both in ebook form and in hardback. I'm a one-man show. I haven't gotten around to doing paperback yet, or an an Audible version.
Yeah.
I hope to find time, but not yet. The drawback, well, and you can also go to your, as much as possible, please patronize your independent bookstore wherever you may be, because I'm an author entrepreneur. Some people call us authorpreneurs, and they're trying to make a way in this big, tough, competitive world. And they give you the personal touch that the big outfit out in Seattle can't do. But the drawback to ordering, and my book is cataloged, the main supplier, Ingram, that bookstores and libraries use, it's cataloged there, so they can order it for you. The drawback to doing those remote ways like that, virtual before the pandemic hit, is that I'm out of the loop. I can't physically sign the book. You're somewhere 1,000 miles away. However, I can provide you with what's known as an author book plate, little larger than business card size things that say, author. I have them in the other room. They came out before the pandemic.
Right.
And so I can sign those and stick them in an envelope and maybe charge you nominal postage and handling, $1 or so, and they'll come to you in the mail, and then it's your book. Tape it inside, Elmer's glue it inside, but you do have my signature captured, and you can say the author signed it. Awesome. I am doing a book tour through Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, and Idaho, and then back into Montana. I'll be leaving in a few days, and I'm trying to stop at some independent bookstores, including a shout out for the Old Firehouse bookstore in Fort Collins. I'll also be doing and I'm doing a virtual tour, a virtual event for them. Also doing a virtual event for, let's see, it's called the Book Bungalow down in St. George, Utah. Trying to be flexible. There may be others, but those are confirmed. Where if you see this Zoom session or Facebook Live or on Facebook, their Facebook pages, you do business with your local bookstore. And last but not least, you can reach me at montanawordsmith@gmail.com. That's my state, MONTANA, no space in there, Montana Wordsmith, WORDSMITH@gmail.com. And I don't mind giving out my phone number. It is 406-690-5444. 406-690-5444. Give me a call and we can talk. We can work things out. I hope I've touched pretty much all the bases. Oh, and you can also I have a Facebook page. Friend me on Facebook if you want, and go to Midway, the Facebook page, Midway Bravery. Give me a like.
Cool.
I think I've covered all the bases.
They'll find you if they want to, and we'll put those links. But I think if you go to the website, right, you'll be able to track you down, midwaybravery.com.
Yeah.
Go for there. All right. Well, thanks so much for some insight into your inspiration, why you wanted to write the book and where the story came from, and taking the time to put it all together. I know this is no small project by any means, and appreciate you sharing it with the world, these stories. I wish, and in fact, it almost inspires me to do a similar sort of thing with my grandfather, Dutch, who, like I said, perished on Iwo Jima, because they actually named an airfield after him. He was kind of a big leader, big hero guy, and I think there are some stories similar to this in his story.
I heartily encourage you to do that, James, and to other people who may be listening, even if you may or may not think you've got a book in you, but somehow, some way, preserve those preserve the past. Without history, we're kind of doomed. And
Yeah.
I'm biased that way. I have a journalism degree, but I minored in history a long time ago. So it's near and dear to my heart. We have to keep those, and in my case, somewhere down the line, I'd like to do my father's memoirs. He was a very young soldier right at the end of the war. He was drafted, a little town in eastern Montana, just as he got out of high school, probably right as VE Day, the surrender of Hitler's forces in Europe, occurred. By the time he finished basic training, the combat part of the war was over, but he was part of a very, very important component, the occupation forces in Germany, to rebuild that shattered society. And he passed away, I guess, 8 years ago with full military honors. He put together what he called his biography. I need to hopefully work up a memoir, of an account of what he and perhaps he and others in the occupation forces did when the shooting was over, but when they had to still provide law and order and rebuild society in the aftermath of Hitler's destruction.
Rebuilding all the systems, and very, like you said, very important job too.
And may I end by saying that, again, if I can go full circle, if it had not been for that wonderful woman that I was married to for 18 years, we would celebrate our 19th wedding anniversary in less than 2 weeks. If not for her words of encouragement, I can't say for sure this book would have ever come into place. So I believe she's in heaven right now. Thank you, Carolyn.
Yeah, thank you, Carolyn. Yes, we're all grateful for her encouraging words to help you bring this story to us. So thanks again. All right. Thanks again, Dennis. It's always great chatting with you about this. I love it.
Thanks, James.